And I thought since this is preliminary that through this process, and we've been talking about integration and bundling of different projects in the region, but to look to see if there's any other similar structures within the Irwin boundaries that we may be able to bundle with that. So they're just thoughts. I don't know that that would be supported, but we can try.
That's great.
That's really good news.
Okay, consent agenda. Item A, which is approve the meeting summary for the special meeting which was held on June 15th. I think everybody has a copy of that. Are there any changes or additions that you see for that summary? And if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting summary for June 15th.
That's all.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Aye. The action agenda is a project status update, and I think that falls into this report.
So I'd like to start with just saying that I'll go with the memorandum of understanding to get rolling here. To date, we have 34 signed copies of the MOU, and that a lot of those came out of the project solicitation process. We also, Randy, Trina, and I met with Vicki Newland in Butte County last week to get the ball rolling with the memorandum of understanding with Butte County for the overlap area between the northern Sacramento Valley, Irwin, and our region, which is essentially just the Butte County portion. So things that we talked about were how to coordinate projects and project development, and then also some outreach. And it was, Vicki had noted that there wasn't a lot of input from the tribes in the Oroville area, so that was a place that Trina thought that she might be able to help coordinate some outreach efforts with them. And so we're going to be working on that, and then we're also going to be starting to pass back and forth an MOU to get drafted. Kind of an update on Randy. Trina, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that basically summarizes it.
Just within the regional descriptions, we really didn't go into that region at all. And so if Butte County isn't really addressing that either, we really do need to look at that overlap area, because they're very significant traditional properties of Mayu village sites, gathering areas, other places like Feather Falls, Lake Oroville, Concow, some pretty big areas.
Well, I'm glad you guys made that contact, because that was one of the areas that we were a little concerned about, reaching into Butte County, so that's good. Okay. Anything else?
So move down, just give a brief overview. We've billed about 40% of the budget to date. The schedule, we're in month 15 at this point, so about 60% through the project, and we're about 50% of the work product is completed. We have a target date of June of 2016 to have a final plan. That is June 4th is the end of the grant agreement. I'm going to talk a little bit later about where we are and how we can move things along to hopefully get things done a little earlier than that, so that we can be sitting pretty for the first round of Prop 1 funding as it comes out.
Good deal.
So just to give an overview of what we have left, we have the climate change technical study. We're going to get a draft of that in the next couple of weeks, and we anticipate having a presentation to the management group at the end of October, and that will, and then they'll have a draft chapter shortly thereafter. So that's pretty close to being wrapped up. The forest water balance study is the one that Burkhart is doing, and he is working on that, and we'll probably finish it up this winter. And we're working out the the scope of work for the community vulnerability study, which has to do with the well assessment, specifically in disadvantaged community areas. And we're working on the DAC identification, and then the draft plan, of course, is the last big task.
It's interesting that you wouldn't think it would be so difficult to identify the disadvantaged communities,
Yeah.
and yet it seems like one of the areas where everybody looks at it differently. So,
Each department looks at it differently at the state level. And there are some changes proposed in the Proposition 1 guidelines, also of adding another layer, which would be the economically disadvantaged areas, which is 85% of the median household income, whereas the disadvantaged community definition is 80%, so it adds another level, and also recognizing the severely disadvantaged as well, which I know Portola is, and we're still working on the list and others.
I can say that watching those emails back and forth with DWR, she's wrestling with it pretty hard, because they give us a tool and you click on it and it shows no income and no people.
Basically, the problem is that the state looks at it from the community, the blocks, whereas we need them to look at the designated places. It just doesn't have that refinement to it. So.
One of the things I'll add is being at the Plymouth leadership meeting this morning with the forest plan update. I think they have to look at some of the communities too in their forest plan update. They were interested in our little brief discussion on the disadvantaged communities. They had a different term for it, Joe. You know what that is? It's something that the forest plan update will have to actually look at and incorporate too. Maybe Leah can remember the term. No.
Sorry.
Thank you. And item 3 is, we're on item 2, stakeholder outreach updates.
I wanted to share first that I attended a Sierra Nevada Conservancy meeting in Paradise at the beginning of the month, and it was an opportunity. We were invited to provide information on the projects or the process that we are in. So we put together a map, which is over in the corner here, of projects, and shared that with folks. It was an opportunity to let them know what we were doing and to talk with them about the projects we have. I think the most benefit was talking with the Butte County Fire Safe Council and getting to talk about the map and where projects were laying. So we did that, and then we had the Butte County meeting, which is another outreach effort. Really, the work groups in the last couple of months since our last meeting have been, I think that most of them just met at the workshop on the 21st. That was kind of our big meeting for that time period. And I don't know if the work group coordinators want to give any other updates. I think in general, that we're just continuing to work on the project integration process and developing recommendations on resource management strategies. And we'll hear one presentation, the first presentation from the Municipal Services Work Group on recommendations this meeting, and then at the following 2 meetings we'll also have presentations from the other work groups. So we did hold the 4 work group meetings that are in our work plan for the grant. Some of us of the Municipal Services Work Group met a 5th time just to get their resource management strategy recommendations down, and then we'll be meeting, starting our 2nd year of meetings after this one. And Trina, did you have any updates for the tribal outreach?
Yeah, some of them. We didn't have a meeting in September, but we do have a lot of ongoing work. And part of it is just trying to form what TEK is and how it can integrate into the processes. And so really outreaching to tribes and different tribal people, not necessarily recognized tribes, but recognizing the leadership of families within the region and people that have relocated. Along that line, one of the other things to set a baseline that we've discussed a little bit is reaching out to the other communities within the other work groups and using some of their knowledge as a baseline for what existed prior to European contact in terms of landscape structures and infrastructure. And so like with the ag community and other communities. And so we really want to maybe have some sort of a meeting or a storytelling of some sort this winter to be able to share that component if people are interested as part of this process. The other thing is
Your excuse.
we did have a meeting. Leah Wells and myself had a meeting with Julie Griffith-Flatter from Sierra Nevada Conservancy last week to talk about a larger template of tribal engagement with TEK and what that would look like on a regional structure. So that also will really help this process, because one of the problems with tribes is we encompass, we see things spatially at a large level. And so to bring it down to project development is sometimes difficult without seeing the big picture and understanding the mechanisms of that. And so this could be a really great process with the support of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy as well.
How many tribes are in our area?
Recognized or unrecognized?
Well, unrecognized because we know that I don't think the Mayhews are recognized, are they?
The Greenville Rentry is federally recognized and the Susanville Rentry is federally recognized. The Susanville Rentry is comprised of several different tribes.
Oh.
Mayhew, Washoe, Pitt River, is it Pitt River? Mayhew, so they're like they were the landless tribe when they were recognized, or the homeless tribes were able to go. Then there's the Taylorsville Rentry has been petitioning. The United Mayhew Nation has been petitioning. Then there's a lot of people that are not part of that. There's several allotments in the Upper Feather River watershed that are held in trust for specific families through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is through the Department of Interior. So I know my family has 2 of those properties here in American Valley still.
It's not on Chandler Road by any chance.
One is.
Am I living on it?
My great-great-grandmother was Sadie Chandler.
Oh, my word. So how many specific tribes do you think are in our area?
Well,
There
are at least 4 that are federally and unfederally recognized, and then there's some others that aren't represented. And so the idea of traditional ecology is to identify each family and how they want to be engaged, if at all, and move forward with that. So in the Sierra Valley area, it's harder because I think the influx and the diseases killed. There aren't a lot of families that are from there, but we know that there were a lot of Native people from that area. So that's been one of the places that Washoe and Mayhew have had a hard time saying, well, my great-grandmother was from there. McReynolds Valley for us and those places, yes. Mohawk Valley, a little more. But we do know those villages and the names of those villages and the existence of those places. Good.
You were right.
So those things can affect reserve water rights and beneficial uses on it at the tribal engagement part.
Item 3 is what we were just talking about, traditional ecological knowledge.
Okay, so I did do a presentation on this at the innovation workshop, and I left my my bag with all of my everything at home, probably by my front door or something. So I wrote down a few notes on this envelope of what it is. And again, it's something that we've wrestled with, and how to define it. It's defined differently by region, and as you guys know, you work in the landscape, each region is different, and so, of course, the way that you manage a landscape is going to be different, so what are the species there? And then, part of that comes down to what is the desired land use? There was no pristine wilderness in the United States at European arrival. Everything was highly manipulated. And so a lot of us continue to see the way that communities live now as a similar structure. Everything's highly manipulated to our benefit. Unfortunately, a lot of tribal people feel that the manipulation and the change of land use and communities has actually caused a lot of destruction. And so that's where traditional ecology comes in and can play a role in those things. So what we would need to do is look at baselines. So we go back to pre-contact. What were those baselines and how did they exist? And part of that we have through our storytelling. If you look at some of the work groups are looking at LIDAR and rock structures, crevices, land geologic functions, where water was, where it isn't anymore, things like that. So what was here, what should be here that isn't anymore. And then the primary objective is optimal health. And so what is the optimal health of water? No matter what else we do or how else we manipulate it, how do we maintain optimum health of water while we move forward with our desired uses of these landscapes? Some of the strategies are just how in this process, like with this project or with the infrastructure that we already have, how do we go back to optimum health of water and other species and biodiversity? And so there's a lot of things that fit into those strategies, but it comes down to optimal health, and of course that can be interpreted differently by everybody. But we're talking about, again, a large spatial extent of optimal health. So can you drink your drinking water, in the creek in front of you? If not, then it's not optimal health. So just because it's treated and yeah, that can be a strategy. You treat it and it goes back into a system that it is close to that. Some of the process would be through the IRWIMP, through this process, is that it goes back to the TAC. And the TAC, I see the TAC as continuing through this entire process and continuing to have meetings. And so as these projects come up and we're looking at project integration, and Leah and I went over some of those again last week, and so at our next TAC meeting we'll look at that. How do we integrate traditional ecology into these? And so the TAC, the people that are participating, hopefully will reach out to other people as well that can't be at those meetings and say, there's one of our elders is in Meadow Valley. She had a stroke a couple of months ago. She feels a really urgent need to share and to record her knowledge and information. So I go out there and spend some time with her. Other tribal members may have other elders that they have access to. What's important to you? What do you remember? How do we move forward? And so the TAC would identify the appropriate people for each region, who needs to be contacted, what families are from there. And traditional ecology is, again, the people doing the work. It's our knowledge. It's not us handing you a brochure and saying, this is what you do and how to do it. Here, go do it. It's having a continued relationship with a place. And I think the Ranchi community identified that very well. Some of the other communities, maybe not as much. I wouldn't undermine your relationship to any place, but so that would be part of the process, is doing that and then looking at the resources available. So one of the resources we've used is the Greenville Rancheria Fire Crew, because they have the red card, they have the trucks and the engines. It's not necessarily traditional ecology when they go out and do it, because sometimes their families aren't from those places. Some of the methodologies they use wouldn't be considered traditional ecology. The windows that they have to do it in, the burn windows, the spring, not the best time to burn for plant and animal health, but if that's the only time that we can burn as opposed to fall because of the threat of wildfire, then we adjust the way that we need to with resources and time. So just trying to refine how it can work here, and so it is a process in action, and we look forward to more interaction with everybody.
Thank you. Any questions for Trina? I know she can't wait to answer them.
I'm just curious about the evolution of ecological traditions. And it seems like did it always, did we see a movement of change over time? In other words, even if elders passed on the same process, did the next generation modify that due to the changing environmental conditions?
Yeah, there was always an evolution, and if the Maidu and other native communities in the world had been allowed to adjust at their own pace without the disruption of all the things that we had to go through, that some of them were pretty horrific, there would have been a natural involvement and things would have adjusted. And we have stories in the mountain Maidu, Poseidon Maidu community. We have a story about the earth shifting, and so the earth shifts, and according to science and the geology of rocks and the magnetism, some of the rocks are still pointing, or the magnetism of the earth kind of supports that the earth has shifted several times, and approximately every 11,000 years, give or take a few thousand years. And we've said that this is the fourth time. So in Maidu, at 11,000 years, we have 44,000 years of earth shifting as it currently is now. And so there was always climate change and alterations, and so we've survived that many times through our processes. It may be, we didn't have CO2 in a lot of the industry that we do now to accelerate anything, but yes, it has evolved, and according to use and need, it would continue to evolve.
Okay. Thank you, Trina. Item 4 is chapter review process and schedule. Uma?
So I talked just a little bit about schedule earlier, and we're at about 60% of our way through the 2-year window for this project, and about 50% completed. The chapters have not rolled out as soon as we thought they were originally, and that's because our project process has taken a little bit longer to step through. So I'm suggesting a more streamlined process, and this comes from talking with several urban regions about what worked for them and how they rolled the chapters out. So the process that I'm recommending for discussion would be for staff to develop the chapters based on what's developed in the work groups and what comes out of the management group meetings. That it go through an internal staff review, which would basically be Randy, and then it would be released for a 30-day comment period, and that would be released to both the management group and the work groups at the same time, and posted on the website. Comments collected at the end of that 30 days. Staff would work to incorporate information into the chapters and then bring any complex questions or controversial comments or pieces to the management group during presentation of the chapters. So that would be what we had set up before was that the chapters would be drafted, brought to the management group for presentation, then sent down to the work groups and then back to the management group. So it kind of cuts out a step of that process and shortens the time tonight. What we're hoping to do is get an admin draft plan by March, April, which is a pretty aggressive timeline. And it would be, let's step back into the chapter releases, we would release them as they were developed. So we have a couple that are ready to be released now. And then they would be, I'm anticipating like every 2 to 3 weeks we would be releasing a chapter. And then our goal would be to have the public draft plan available by April or May, hopefully by April, so that we can have it in for the deadline for the grant. And part of this is the Proposition 1 guidelines will be coming out at the beginning of next year, and they're hoping to at least release solicitations for the planning grants in March, April. They haven't talked too much about when the implementation grants would be released, but they're hoping for the beginning part of next year. So we want to make sure that we're ready for that Prop 1 funding window.
That is aggressive.
Yeah, it is.
But I like the streamlining of it, because the step of bringing it here first and then sending it out and then bringing it back, that first step I never did really see as being necessary. So I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but it seems to me that we would be better off to have the work groups give us their comments and have that folded in before we look at it.
I agree.
Okay. Okay, so I don't think we need a motion for that. Everybody agrees, and that's a good direction.
And we spent some time thinking about how to do it. This is what we think is the best way to expedite it. Still
think
get
so,
input on it. Not make everybody go to sleep in meetings if they're making chaff.
Well, and the work groups are really where the really pertinent comments will come from. I think that's a really good way to do it.
Also, as part of that, the coordinators have been talking about how best to funnel this out to the work groups, whether to have actual physical meetings or whether we do most of it by email and have meetings as needed. We have 4 identified in the grant work plan for the second year. But again, I think it'll probably be different for each work group, but as we go into it, it may be hard to get folks to attend sitting through a discussion on a chapter that they may not have interest in. So I think those ones we'll probably do by email, but we're still working that out.
That's a good observation.
Yeah.
Okay, we moved item 5, so we're on to what would be on the agenda, item 6, work group integration and climate change workshop.
Oh, yes, that's me. So this will be pretty brief. Just wanted to report on how the workshop went. It was held on August 21st. The first half was the work group integration workshop, which was a requirement of our grant agreement, and was really the first time that the work groups had all been together in the same room and had an opportunity to meet each other and talk about the process that they've been through and what they've been working on, and to hear a summary of all of the projects that were submitted. Most of the work groups were familiar with the ones that had come through their work group, right? This was an opportunity to really discuss all the way around. We had more than 30 participants, had great participation. The afternoon session was the climate change workshop, and it was really set as a working session, and folks stuck around for that and really participated well in that. The purpose of the morning session was to have that collaboration between the work groups, to discuss their efforts and to hear a summary of all the projects that were submitted, and then to consider some strategic integration of projects that would have greater impact on the region. Those that have a multi-benefit and then regional projects that would affect the whole region. So for the next steps, the coordinators met again on September 9th as a follow-up meeting to that, to kind of record what had happened during the meeting as far as starting to make lists of integration projects and some regional projects. So we incorporated their feedback and then continuing to work on identifying those lists and putting them together, and then we'll send them back to the work groups to make sure we've got it right, incorporated our comments correctly, and then we'll be presenting them to the management group. That's our next steps. For the afternoon session, the purpose of that meeting was to so that folks could hear the climate change scenarios that were vetted by the consultants, to discuss the vulnerability rankings and the adaptation strategies that were identified. And again, it was a working session. It was a lot of back and forth. and they got a lot of great input that they were able to put into the vulnerability assessment they'll be giving us in the next month.
But I think they've given us the vulnerability assessment, I got one.
We do.
It's the chapter that they produced,
Yes,
right?
right. So I haven't had a chance to read it yet, so.
Okay. I haven't either. but-
And so those presentations are in your packet if you're interested in those and weren't able to attend the meeting. So the next steps for the climate change folks are to finalize the vulnerability study, which they have done. They sent it in the last couple of days. Finalize the technical study, and then draft the climate change chapter, and they are hoping to present that to your group at the end of October.
Well, I would say judging, and frequently I do judge by the level of talking and moving around, that the morning session in particular, I thought, from my observation, went really well. There was a lot of sharing of information and looking at each other's projects and discussions, so I was really pleased with how that went. And I was curious if that was purely my wishful thinking, or if the work group participants felt that it was of that level of value to them. So that would be my question to any of the work group people that were there. Did you feel that there was a lot of good interaction between the work groups and discussions, or?
I think there's a lot of good exchange, informational exchange, because as individuals, like Trina was saying, we may have a project in mind that may affect what her group is seeking to rectify or whatever, and knowing that could change our way of thinking about how we were going to do that project, and I think that was important. That was really good.
Gary?
I kind of agree with what Frank said too, is just being able to share ideas from different groups, and kind of seeing where you're going to interact in a positive way, but also in a way in which understanding why one person does a project a certain way. I think it really was. I felt that energy, at least in quite a number of the people, that they walked away with going, wow, I didn't even know how this could tie to that until I talked to someone, or that this is what they were doing in this work group. So I feel like there was, quite a bit of that, and definitely some really good positive energy of just people with different ideas and different goals and objectives being in the same room and being able to share and realizing we have a lot of commonality when we get together like that, which you don't always feel when we're separately meeting and just emailing back and forth. So
I know when we looked at the project submittals, that was one of the things I thought is, I don't know, this could be, seeing that, how they could network together and be stronger for that. And I also wanted to say that that map is so impressive. When you really look at the projects laid out on that map and the areas that they cover and the type of projects, good work with the working groups. I'm so impressed with that. I think we need to put that in the newspaper or something. We could use some good publicity around here once in a while. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, item 7 is a summary of step 2 project submitted. Speaking of projects.
I'm not going to go into too much detail. I would say the binder here on the back, that is what we received. Those are full copies of everything. So you'll see why I didn't make copies for all of you yet. But in general, we received 81 project submittals. The Agricultural Land Stewardship Group had 15 in the floodplains, meadows, and water bodies. Municipal Services had the most at 39. The Tribal Advisory Committee submitted 5 projects, and the Uplands Forest 9. So there were a lot of, almost everybody who submitted for the conceptual submitted for the step 2. There were some projects that were combined and submitted as a combination. But yeah, we had a really great return. One of the things that came out of the meetings was a discussion about capacity building, and there had been a conceptual project that had been put forward for, I think it was by Plymouth and Sierra counties for capacity building. So and we're going to hear more about this in our presentation that's coming up next, but I just want to touch on it, and this is specific to the Irwin grant discussion, but capacity building as it relates to grants is the technical, managerial, and financial ability to pursue, implement, and manage grants and projects, to increase knowledge, abilities, contacts, referral resources, and funding opportunities. And in the bigger picture, capacity is human resource development, is organizational development, and institutional and legal framework development. So I wanted to bring this up because it's still a concern of all the project components, this capacity building piece. And it wasn't really built into the step 2 project submittals. So there's still a question as to what do we do. And so it's something to keep in mind as we listen to Elizabeth give her talk. She's going to discuss that a little bit. So there is, in your packets, there is a summary of the projects, all of the projects that were submitted, their initial categorization, which is their project number, has the project name, the sponsoring agency, a description, a very brief summarized description, and then the total budget number that was put forward for those. Just to give you an idea of what was submitted, and then we'll be talking later about what our next steps are with this process.
Norman, did you do any kind of addition of all the numbers for the costs?
I didn't, but it's up there.
It's up there in the millions and millions. Got to.
So that's all I have for summary, unless there's some specific questions about projects.
Anybody have a question? Okay, moving on. Item 8, IRWM program implementation. And I believe that's Elizabeth.
Yeah, I wanted to, we're really grateful to have Elizabeth Betancourt here. She's been involved in, I think, 7 IRWM processes and has a lot of information and knowledge about implementation, what comes next after the plan is completed, and has a lot of knowledge about management groups around the state and how they've struggled with some of these same questions that you are. And this presentation and what things she's going to talk about will really feed into our next 2 items, which is the questions that we're going to go through for the project implementation of the project's discussion, and also the monitoring and the plan performance. Sure, thank you.
But I hope that there's enough that's already back there for I'll just stand up here. I'm Elizabeth Betancourt. I work with Forest Grid Associates, which is a small engineering and environmental consulting firm. I'm a little bit of an anomaly in that firm. I do a lot of sort of larger scale, big picture watershed management planning, climate change modeling and interpretation, large group decision-making processes such as this, and have a huge enthusiasm for it. So please excuse my voice. I've had a cold for a couple of weeks. I think I'm not contagious anymore, so I apologize, but I had a cough towards the end of it here, so sorry about that. So IRWM has been around for a while now. I think that this region began with a plan that was sort of there were 2 options with Prop 50, right? And I think Randy, you and Leah, did you start it with you had a functionally equivalent plan?
Pretty much, that's what it looked like.
Okay. Okay. And so, excuse me. And I have to say, I started with CABI when I was actually just out of college and started in the process with CABI of actually designing the IRWP in accordance with DWR's guidelines. And having seen what the Upper Feather did with the functionally equivalent plan, I have to say that I really like that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but functionally equivalent sort of makes regions look at what you have and how you can use it to meet these objectives looking in the future. I think that the current guidelines probably have the intention of doing that, and it sounds like the planning that you're doing now is really very conscious planning, and UMA's doing an amazing job. So guiding you through this process and doing so much outreach. But some of the things that I'll be talking about really is looking at the resources that you have and using what you have in the region. So I'll start out a little bit with the strategic plan for IRWM. How many of you are aware that the Department of Water Resources is doing a strategic plan for IRWM for the future? You know, a few of you know. How many of you went to one of those workshops? Leah, Nina, good. Okay, good. So DWR used some of the resources, unfortunately, from Prop 84 from the interregional interregional planning, and diverted those, though, for a good cause, for strategic planning. So to look at what role IRWM is going to play in the future of water in California. And if any of you are familiar with the most recent Bulletin 160, California Water Plan, IRWM does play a prominent role, at least in verbiage, in the future of water in California water. So the strategic plan was developed, or at least the concept is to look at where IRWM is going. And so they really tried to make it a grassroots process of what do you need? What are the things that you, the stakeholders, see that are missing in IRWM right now, or if not missing, aren't as strong as they could be? And a lot of things came back. I don't know if any of you have looked at the website lately, but they have sort of an administrative draft up right now that's just the goals and objectives that were identified by the strategic plan sessions that some of you attended and refined by the focus group. And there are dozens, probably more than 100 objectives identified. But they can be broken down into these 4 strategies that I have on your outline here. So embracing IRWM and sharing its values and successes. That's one of the things, Leah was just saying that this group hasn't sent anything to the paper yet. That's one of the things that this, this goal would, or this strategy would address. Make sure that if you're doing something really good, like this project map, that everybody knows about it. Because, there's enough bad rap that government programs get already. And this is a really new, well, relatively new, maybe not to this region. Most of California, it's new to bring a lot of different groups together in one room to talk about resources together. So you want to share your successes. Strategy number 2, aligning government programs and regulatory action to support IRWM. This, I think, is probably one of the most important strategies on there, or in the plan. I think it's embodied, probably in an unfortunate way, by the SGMA, the Good Groundwater Law that went in place last year. SGMA did not, in fact, identify IRWM as a priority pathway for doing groundwater management. And IRWM would be the perfect pathway to do groundwater management. So that's one of the things that Strategy 2 addresses. Strategy number 3, strengthening regional governance, capacity, and practices. That's a little bit of the capacity building that Uma was just talking about. How can regions share what has worked and what hasn't worked? And then enhancing regional assistance strategy for looking at how DWR can better infiltrate is not the word I'm looking for, integrate into your region to help you with some technical capacity things. And then one of the goals I wanted to bring up that I find a particular interest in, actually I'm taking action with a couple of other groups right now in writing some draft guidelines even for DWR to consider, but baseline funding is one of the objectives that came out of the strategic plan process. And the amount they're looking at that they recommended is huge for most of the regions I work with, but they're looking at $250,000 a year, which of course, for each region, for each IRWM region. Of course, that would require a legislative action. And so some of us are starting to work together to talk about, that's great, but do we want to be giving a lot of money to groups that aren't implementing not only the letter of IRWM, but not the spirit of IRWM either, right? And so we're kind of starting to talk about how that might look. The legislature, just FYI, has not yet received the strategic plan. DWR has been doing some sort of last-minute edits. They released a draft to the focus group, for the strategic plan focus group, 2 weeks ago, so hopefully it'll get to the legislature by October. I'm not sure.
So I got a question on 225, I think you mentioned. Is that for capacity to put grants together?
Yeah.
For each region on an ongoing basis?
To meet, right? To increase outreach, to just do your basic administrative functions. That's a huge amount of money in most rural areas. That's big. So actually, some regions are thinking, well, we could use that to do administrative functions, but we could totally use that to actually put projects on the ground too. a lot, I mean, you know, you can do fuel reduction projects for, you know, $50,000 invasive species stuff. So yeah, different regions are thinking about how they might use that in different ways. Of course, it's not available yet, but it is something that probably there will be a request for some advocacy in the future on that.
To support the legislation.
That we hope will be
Do
coming.
you have any idea when that will go forward at this point?
The group that I'm working with, we would like to structure it so that it hits the legislature in time for the budget. So we're looking at February, March of next year, but it's very nascent right now. So I don't think anybody thinks it shouldn't happen in the IRWM community, but if we're putting together recommendations for what those baseline requirements should be, that's where the disagreement could come in. So I have hope that we can make that timeline, but it's coming pretty quick. So yeah, actually, I should say too, if any of you in the region, in the room, or otherwise feel like you'd like to take part in and be active in developing those guidelines or that recommendation, then, you know, like I said, very nascent planning stage, so it's a great time to get on and make your mark. Opportunities in IRWM, and maybe I skipped a little bit there. You guys are at the planning stage. I think maybe you've put together an implementation application. You have an implementation grant right now, or had one in the past.
We've had Prop 50.
Had Prop 50 implementation in the past. Okay. So it can be, so how IRWM is structured right now in the guidelines make it very easy to follow the letter of IRWM and not necessarily the spirit. And I think DWR has a hard time with how to help regions implement the spirit. So when IRWM was put in place with Prop 50, the real concept behind that was that groups come together and do their planning together, right? Not just water resources, but you know, there's a land use feature in there, transportation planning, climate change, all kinds of planning could be done by this diverse group. And I think that the way the guidelines for both the plans and project development are written don't always encourage that kind of broad thinking. They're written to check a box, which, you know, works when you're working with the whole state. It really streamlines the process, but I think it can make it hard for groups to see how IRWM could be implemented on a much broader scale. So, so bridging that gap from planning, okay, we're done with our plan, where do we go now, to implementation beyond just the plan. That's kind of the area I'd like to talk about here. So I think there's a couple of, probably, I'm sure that there are many more that I listed here, but I just grouped them into education, advocacy, and integration. Education is probably pretty basic. It sounds like you're doing that really well already, doing a lot of outreach to the public. I think some of one of the groups that can be overlooked either on purpose or on accident is elected officials. They can be a challenge for sure to work with and to integrate into a collaborative process. But they also have a lot of power to help a group advance its interests. Am I saying, tell me if I'm totally, like, you know, stepping on my own toe here.
So,
Right now you only have one in the room.
No. You're an exception. I can tell.
Don't step on my toe.
Yeah, watch it.
Yeah.
It's an agenda thing can be a challenge when there are multiple levels of elected officials in a room. Just that's the nature of being an elected official. You're an advocate for your nation. Thank you. Not known in my family for PC. But they're really important in the process of getting things done. If you want to go talk with, we were talking about Brian Daly at lunch. If you want to go talk with Brian Daly about a big, you know, forest management project in your area, he's gung-ho, and he's going to say, well, who else is an advocate for that in your region? And he's going to want to know that those local elected officials are on board. So they're a really important part of the process. Some of the ways that other regions have integrated elected officials into the process. And actually, you could do this for anyone, general population or target membership, is by doing tours. That can be really fun. It can bring enthusiasm into something that might otherwise be a little bit boring. I had a friend point out that most water planning in California is done in windowless rooms, which is really unfortunate because we have such beautiful, beautiful things outside. Maybe Forest Service gets out a little bit more, I don't know. Depends on where you're at, I guess. But yeah, I think it's really important. Probably not even just for your potential members and elected officials, but for yourselves as well, to see other people's project locations. And Trina, some of the most meaningful outdoor experiences I've had are going to sacred sites with tribes and just seeing in their faces and their words and actions, what the land means to them there. And like you said, ranchers as well, even. And municipal officials, and seeing some of the lower income neighborhoods that they need to serve and maybe don't have the resources to do that. How do we make that happen for them? Going out there to that site can make a really big difference. So that's one of the tools that might be helpful. Another tool that has been used in some regions is putting together just publication. It can be a brochure, it can be a 2-pager thing, it can be a press release even, but just something in your hand that you can have to hand to your boss or your stakeholder group, put in customer water bills, things like that. That can be a good way to get the word out also. And always, always, always give them a way to contact you and get involved and make those along the lines. Advocacy, that's probably the nearest and dearest to my heart. There's any number of state, regional, and local entities to do advocacy too, right? So how do you target what you'd like to do? And it can be a bad word in a group as diverse as IRWM, regional water management groups tend to be. So, of course, you don't need to get on the same page that you even wanted to do that before you embarked on something like that. But there have been a couple of bills in the last year or two that some regions have taken action on. Are you guys active with Roundtable of Regions? That's one way to stay up on legislation that might affect IRWM. They don't act as a unit. There's not like a Roundtable of Regions sign-off thing, but they just bring legislation to the attention of regional water management groups. You can take action or not. They often will have example letters, form letters that you can send in to your electeds to. Aqua is an example of a organization, the Association of California Water Agencies. It wouldn't represent everyone in this room, but represents water agencies in general. They're an organization that does take legislative action. So you kind of have to weigh, what kind of activity you want to do. Are different entities taking action in a way that mimics your values and mission statement?
Can you repeat that again? Association of California what?
Water agencies. And they actually, last year or the year before, one of our Sierra activists, well, I shouldn't call him an activist, he's an elected official, or he was an elected official in Calaveras County, led the charge on Aqua adopting a headwaters initiative. So they actually have a document that recognizes the importance of the headwaters and how California needs to invest in the headwaters and all that. So there's some good things out there to build on. On a regional basis, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, I'm sure you're all aware of their watershed investment program that they're doing in partnership with the Forest Service. I know that's the priority for their grant program moving forward for the next year or two, or 3 actually. So that's a great thing to get involved with if you're interested in large-scale land management, land health, forest, preventing catastrophic fire, that sort of thing. I think there's been some interest too in the overlapping issues of biomass energy and biochar also. I don't know much about that at all, but just if you're interested, I know that there's some periphery issues with that. The Sierra Water Work Group, I know the Upper Feather is a signatory, right, to the Sierra Water Work Group, right?
I don't know if we signed an MOU yet or.
Okay.
But we've been active.
Okay, yeah. I figured
Party
as much. Yeah, I saw your webpage as part of the Sierra Water Work Group, so I just made that assumption.
Yeah, no, we just stepped around a bit.
Okay. Less important. I know one of the things that Liz Mansfield, who is the coordinator of the Sierra Water Work Group, has been thinking one of the benefits of that group could be is taking action on a regional basis. And just to remind you, the Sierra Water Work Group is a group that's made up of regional water management groups up and down the Sierra and Cascade. The Upper Sacramento and Upper Pitt are members also, so it includes some Cascade region as well. And some of the things that they were thinking of taking action on are funding and how funding is split in legislation and in water bonds. Right now the funding is really heavily influenced by population, right? And that's where we all kind of fall short. We don't have a lot of population, which is why we all like to live here. But when 60 to 70% of water resources in California come from the Sierra and Cascade regions, then you think the state would probably want to invest in that, right? So the Sierra Water Work Group is really a group talking about the importance of headwaters, how to convey that importance, that sort of thing. The other thing they're working on, which is something I'm involved in from a business standpoint, is they're putting together a data management system right now that helps, the Tahoe Sierra is the first group that's taking advantage of that, but it's going to help the Tahoe Sierra group to not only keep track of their project and plan data, but also will help them keep track of where their projects are. So it's a map like this, but it's an interactive online GIS map that you can click on a project and get the sponsor, contact information, and then with GIS you can turn layers on and off. Is the project located in a watershed? Is it within city boundaries? What county is it in? Is it within 50 feet of a riparian of a waterway? That sort of thing that you can find out. Yes.
So we do have that on our website for our projects.
Oh, nice.
And is this something that would have, that it would roll into if after the plan was done, the website would maybe not active anymore?
Yeah.
Would it roll into?
Actually, that would be fantastic. If that's information you have already, the idea is for this tool to be Sierra-wide, Sierra Cascade-wide, I should say, and it's built so that you can download data specific to parameters that you identify into PDF or an Excel spreadsheet, so that then you can, for example, immediately total up the regional need. How much money does the legislature need to invest in the Sierra region to get these projects done and these forests safe and all this stuff, right? So that's where it's important to make sure your project list is up to date and comprehensive. But yeah, we'd love to get your data and yeah, maybe, I don't know if you have Liz's number, but okay. Yeah, that would be good. That would be great to have. So Tahoe Sierra will wind up, we'll get all the tool complete for them probably by October, November. And then Yosemite Mariposa, I think, is going to add in towards the end of this year, beginning of next. Upper Sac has expressed interest in Cabby. So with Upper Feathers, we'd have 5 regions. That would be fantastic. Yeah, so Sierra Water Work Group is another good organization for advocacy. And then on a local level, city and county governments, tribes, all of these entities have policies, right? How the organization relates to natural resources, relates to land management. So if the Regional Water Management Group has, a vision about how your region's going to look in 20 years or in 50 years, then you're essentially advocating that stance to these planning entities, city governments, county governments, tribal governments. Hopefully, most of those priorities are embodied in the plan, of course. But you want to make sure that now that you have this plan, the best way to implement it is through the organizations that are already on the ground. So making sure that there's harmony between all of the governance stuff. Integration, the last opportunity I was going to discuss here today. Interregional integration, I don't know, it sounds like you have some overlap in planning areas.
A small overlap.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And then how about any split watersheds? Is the Upper Feather like a whole watershed, or are there? Okay.
It's a comprehensive watershed.
Okay. Because in some regions, so like in Cabby, for example, one of the irrigation districts gets some of their water out of the Tahoe Sierra region. And so an inter-regional project to address, whatever, conservation or watershed health, that sort of thing, would make sense. Of course, it would make sense even if you didn't have a shared, watershed. But just that's one of the sort of low-hanging fruit things. If you have a shared area in your boundary, sometimes that's a way to do an interregional project that makes sense. One of the things that has gotten in the way of interregional planning in the last probably 3 years is the fact that that is the pot of money that was taken by DWR to do the strategic plan. So there hasn't been money for interregional planning in a long time. But DWR has exhibited a renewed interest in interregional planning, and I've talked with a couple of their IRWM staff about, if you really are wanting to do IRWM, Integrated Regional Water Management Planning, that's not just the region that you're looking at, not just the Upper Feather, it's not just the Yuba County IRWM, it's the whole landscape, right? It's kind of what Trina was talking about a little earlier. Planning for the whole landscape. And so if you're not interested in or not funding interregional implementation, then you're kind of missing a big portion of the point of IRWM, right? So this is, talking with DWR. So, I don't know the extent to which this region is interested in doing interregional planning, but one of the projects that has come up in the past year for the Sacramento hydrologic region, which this Upper Feather is a part, is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with robust decision making. It's the process of looking at all possible futures, building a hydrologic, mathematically based model that in which you can input all possible futures and getting sort of trend analysis out of there. So you're not looking, you're running it maybe hundreds or even thousands of times, but you're looking at a trend analysis of what might the future actually look like, and then implementing different projects on top of that. So we've done that in the Yuba region, specific to the Yuba region, but one of the conversations we've had with the Sacramento River Watershed Program is, would that be something that would be helpful for the entire Sacramento hydrologic region? How helpful would it be to ask the legislature, hey, you've been focusing on Southern California and the Delta project for so long, you've been ignoring the Sacramento hydrologic region, and here are the projects, or here's the project type that would be most helpful to our region as a whole. So being able to speak with one voice, similar to how Southern California has been able to do for the last 20 years. So that's interregional collaboration. Lots of possibilities with that. And then project or issue integration. This probably is most relevant to some of the conversations it sounds like you're going to have later this afternoon. Again, with the robust decision making, that effort really did project integration in a way that I have never experienced with just simple IRWM. Many IRWMs, probably most IRWMs, look at integration as, oh, this is a flood control project, and this is a flood control project. Let's just put them together and integrate those projects. Yeah, it might integrate a couple of different levels of, interest groups or governments, but it's not really beyond the basic, I'm doing flood control, so it kind of addresses habitat, and it kind of addresses, groundwater management. Actually doing a project that integrates issues on purpose. So we have a problem, just for example, in the Yuba region with groundwater level stability. Flood control is a huge issue there. And with the trade-off between surface and groundwater use with municipalities. So we don't necessarily want to take a flood control project and a water conservation project and a farmland conservation project, just put them all together and say that answers that question. We want to be able to develop one project that actually addresses all of those things together. So, what if we did something like, something that's already been done in California, the Yuba, or the Yolo Causeway, right? The flood bypass that goes through farmland, and it recharges groundwater. It provides salmoniid habitat, and provides for flood relief in impacted waterways, right? So that's a single project that actually answers a ton of things on purpose. So when you're looking at project integration, what I encourage you to do is to look at the projects absolutely and see whether things can be blended, but also to look at those projects and see whether, maybe we can add, this particular element that would increase the level of participation of maybe underrepresented interest groups in the area, but it would also increase the number of resource management strategies addressed in the plan, things like that. So that can be a challenge to look at differently, and it would be a very new thing for IRWM, but I think it's something that would make your projects much stronger even in the IRWM or in the grant scoring process as well. And so taking advantage of IRWM opportunities. So if you wanted to do any of the above, and not to mention all of the above, how do you do that? How do you finance it? How do you find people to do this kind of thing? How do you get people together to make the agreements to make this happen? My biggest thing is your IRWM itself. I don't know how far along the finance chapter is. That addresses a lot of those things. So on the back of the agenda part, I have references, and that's the finance guidelines. I'm sure you're all super aware of these, very familiar. I'm sure that Uma is super familiar with these. But take this chapter really seriously. I'm sure you've taken your whole plan really seriously, but finance is how you move forward. And how you move forward will really help you to, when you come to this problem and say, what are we going to do? Who's responsible for this? How are we going to move forward? Sometimes in the nascent period of an organization, those are the things that can just make you not meet anymore. And so the finance chapter in particular, I think, is really helpful for, how are we going to move forward? How are we going to handle the responsibilities of day-to-day administration, just of meeting? And so in support of those questions, the next item I brought is Table 15.2 from the Upper Sacramento IRWMP. This is something that we put together that sort of looked at different duties that generally were done as part of IRWM planning, and who would do those as far as institutional capacity or member responsibilities. And I think they have some information from later documents that actually puts financial estimates on some of these things. So that would be helpful. I'm happy to dig that up. But this is something I just pulled from the plan. And so, this is just a reality check. If the group chooses to have no paid staff as IRWM staff, then the members are responsible for everything, right? And being realistic about what those things are that you actually want to be responsible for. What are your priorities? If it was my group, obviously advocacy would be my priority. So I would look for, maybe if I didn't have funding to do it, I would look for somebody who was really engaged in either the legislative process or had an advocacy background and could get on board with the goals and the mission statement that the Regional Water Management Group had. This is really an exercise in mining your region for finances and for talent. And I assure you that any region in California has the capacity to do all of these things. It really is a matter of, are you able to as far as time? Are you willing to as far as having a matching, set of goals and mission statement? And is the group behind it? That's really it. And that's this item C, they're mining regional talent and connections. Investment in the Regional Water Management Group. In most rural regions, that takes the form of time. And in most rural regions, time is even more because you have to drive hours to get here in some cases, right? So yeah, that's something to consider. So it's possible, if the organizations that are participating are able to even donate, $200 a year, then maybe you could buy a GoToMeeting membership and be able to look at things online together, and people wouldn't have to travel. Maybe that would enable a part-time administrator to help pay, I'm not from here, so don't hold anyone to this, but if the county had an administrator that had a part-time capability to dedicate to IRWM, what would that cost and what would you get out of it? And it really is a matter of what do you want out of the IRWMP. If the region only wants projects implemented that are in your plan, well, that's really easy. All you have to do is write the grant application when DWR releases an RFP. That's not a big deal. You probably still meet to figure out what project you wanted. But if you want to go further and build those relationships stronger and build your region into a region that can really, tell DWR, actually, yes, we're the headwaters of the State Water Project, but we think that because we're the headwaters, that you should invest much more money in our headwaters so that we're healthy and we don't burn up every 5 years, right? So it really is a matter of where you want to go and what you want to do. And I don't think there's anything right or wrong, but I do think that regional water management groups are untapped reservoirs of capacity as far as potential funding even from outside bringing it in, and of talent. So, I'm obviously a cheerleader for IRWM. So are there any questions about any of this? I know it's probably something that you haven't really had to think about yet because you've been planning, and so.
I think it's extremely helpful.
Okay. Good.
And expect that we will be putting some of it to good use.
Well, check out the strategic plan. I put the website on there because I really do think it's good work. I mean, it's all of your work, you who attended the meetings, and I do think that there's a lot of potential there. And I would say, too, the Roundtable of Regions and Sierra Water Work Group. To me, that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. Strategic plan, Roundtable of Regions, Sierra Water Work Group. Just, check them out. If they don't fit, they don't fit, and that's okay. But if they don't fit, you can always change them so they do fit, right, by taking part. So, Leah.
One thing I think was extraordinary in the project integration workshop and even in the solicitation is the number of region-wide projects. I don't know, my understanding, most IRWMs, that is not the case.
Oh,
but we
definitely
probably, we had 6 of them, or at least maybe 8.
So that's
That were completely across the whole region and just sort of begged for infilling with future projects and coordination at the regional scale already. And so I just wanted to point that out because I do think, in my understanding, that's pretty extraordinary. And
Yeah.
it's something that somehow we need to build on, but we're not, we'll get into that, but it's not clear how to do it, but it is an extraordinary outcome.
Yeah, and treat your heart about it, too.
Well, yeah, it's amazing. I was shocked. We didn't really understand it because the work groups do their own work until we all got together and we looked at them and went, there, at least in each work group, there were 1 or 2 completely region-wide. So somebody had thought through that regional piece when we were doing our individual projects. So it begs for further work, but we'll have to figure out what that looks like. But it came from the bottom up, definitely. So it's heartfelt and it's a widespread interest across all the work groups. So I just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah.
So maybe you've seen it before, but I wasn't that familiar with that.
Not that level of it, and often region-wide projects are, region-wide projects. But it sounds like
these guys now, they're substantially region-wide.
I'll keep my eye on it. That sounds
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
that.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate your time to come here.
Oh, sure.
She had a 3-hour teacup came from Reading,
Yeah.
and it's now ready at Chico.
Yeah, thanks for moving the agenda around. I appreciate it. Thank you. I do hope to.
Okay, that brings us to item 9, which is project selection process. I know you have some things you want to talk about.
Yeah, so this item is a continuation of what we've been talking about on how to select projects for as implementation projects for the plan. And what we're going to go over today is another way that we can look at it. I spoke with a number of regional representatives who have done it a slightly different way. Rather than ranking and prioritizing projects for the plan and going through that process at this point, they've deferred that process to actual specific grant solicitations that come down. So that's the gist of what we're going to talk about today, and I'm not asking for a decision, what direction from the management group about which way they think they would like to go, whether it's prioritization or working with the projects in this manner instead. So this is to start the discussion, and I'll go ahead and go through what we're thinking. So I'll start with a look ahead as a way to present this. This is kind of what would happen at the grant solicitation piece. A project solicitation would be released by DWR. The management group would either issue a call for projects specifying the solicitation selection criteria, or just go through the plan and look at the projects themselves that we have in there. The management group would select the projects that best meet that solicitation criteria. And then the management group would work on narrowing down that list based on that criteria, so that they come up with a package that it has the projects that best meet that solicitation criteria, and it would put us in a place to have the best package to put forward to obtain grant funding. I hope that makes sense. I just wanted to point out that there would be other opportunities as well, and this is something that Randy had pointed out in this discussion when we were going through this, is that this process and the discussion right now is focused on getting at plan implementation projects that would be for DWR's IRWIM grant funding sources. Having projects included in the plan itself also looks good for other applications and grant opportunities. So when we're talked about, in the slide before, when we talked about the management group putting together the package of application, the application package to go forward to DWR, there's opportunities for projects to go forward individually also, just not for the IRWIM funding, it would be for other grants. So again, it would be beneficial to be in the plan in either case. These are the funding allocations for the Prop 1 IRWIM funds. The Mountain Counties has $13 million. 20% of that will be dedicated to disadvantaged community projects. 10% to projects, 10% to DAC involvement. And there's a couple of approaches that can happen. The Mountain Counties funding area can have a collaborative approach. The regions can get together and say we'll each apply for $2 million per region. Or there can be a competitive approach where each region just kind of goes for as much as they can. That's generally the two approaches. And what's the left section? But okay. So then this alternative selection process, that was just to give you guys some background on how it would roll out after the plan is adopted. So an alternative, which has been used by a number of other IRWIMs, including the Upper Pitt, the Yuba County IRWIM regions, is an inclusive process rather than an exclusive process. It would delay the ranking and prioritization of projects until we got grant solicitations down the road, which will have their own specific scoring criteria. Those regions that have gone through the ranking process find that they have to do it for each solicitation that comes down, so it's kind of saving a step. And the focus instead would be on further developing the projects, so we have really good, strong projects that are more ready for grant solicitations in the future, and we'll be laying that groundwork. And our efforts would be, for the plan, would be more in categorizing the projects, and having lists identifying regional projects and multi-benefit projects rather than the ranked individual list.
Yeah, so for the alternative process, you would be looking at the projects on more of a way of which one is ready to actually start and be developed instead of a more phase one.
We would be working to get the projects further along so that they would be more towards that, but that part would depend on the grant solicitations that come down later. They will usually specify, for example, the drought solicitation that came down as part of the Proposition 84 guidelines a year or so ago. They were really specific. They wanted projects ready to go.
whereas the ones in the future might be more watershed, more geared towards the watershed, which might not necessarily have to be as far along. So it just depends on, that part would depend more on the future grant solicitations. But our effort would be focused, for this plan, would be focused on getting projects along a little bit further so that we could meet that. So we would focus on strategic considerations and multi-benefit projects, and then again, we would be front-loading the project development process a little bit, and hopefully making it easier for the management group to pull from the project lists for future grant solicitations. So the approach that we talked about at the coordinator level earlier this month was to really have the work group coordinators focus on the projects and work with the project components to further develop their projects. One of that would be part of that would be an overall review of the project submittals. What are the gaps? Are there, have they filled out all the forms all the way? Are there, can we beef up the project description and the approaches? Can we further refine those a little bit? And another component that will be coming in from the climate change analysis, and something that we'll have to incorporate into our project process, will be the climate change greenhouse gas emissions worksheet. And that's something that I have a feeling would be people would panic if they saw this at the project component level. How do we do this? It's a very high level overview of it. It's not a real specific analysis of greenhouse gases, but it is a generalized sheet that the work group coordinators could work with each project component to fill out, and then we have that piece for the project solicitations that come up. And it actually was called out in the proposition line scoping meeting that I listened in on. You have a packet up here. I'll go over that in a minute.
So we're going a little bit on that. Your sub-consultants have actually developed a spreadsheet. I don't think it's completely done yet.
No, not quite.
Where you put in some numbers like, use of machinery and stuff like that, and it actually cranks out plus or minus greenhouse gas emissions depending on the project. And they were going to take a look at it to see how it was stacked up against the California Environmental Quality Act requirements that we have to look at when we do a CEQA type project.
Good. Well, I'm glad they're working on it, but I don't think we want to waste much time talking about that today, because I think that's a little bit further down the road.
Right.
Right.
But if I hear what you're saying, instead of taking the projects within, say, municipal service and trying to rank them like this is the most important, this is the second, third, that instead we would group projects under their categories, but without ranking them, so that no matter which grant opportunity came along, whichever thing in that category seemed to fit it would be what we would look at bringing forward.
Right.
And the other advantage I can see of that is you talked about other grant opportunities other than DWR type grants. And being in the plan actually will help them with that grant process. But if you were ranked 10 in the plan, that might not help you so much, but it might be the perfect thing for that project. So I'm thinking that I really like the concept of not trying to rank the projects within their categories. Because I think when the opportunity comes to actually apply for something or do something, at that point we'll be looking, and that goes to your question earlier, we'll be looking at, in this category, what do we have that fits what that grant board is looking for? And maybe combine even some that are in there that might fit what they're looking for. So I think that by not ranking them, number one, it solves the problem, because I've just been laying awake nights thinking, how are we going to rank these? But number two, it literally gives us a lot more flexibility going forward, I think.
It does.
So
I
don't
totally
know.
agree with everything you said. And I just want to add one friendly amendment to your thoughts.
Hurry up, because I'm about to take a break.
Okay. Is that I just like to figure out some way that we can put in a placeholder for a project that we don't know that's there, that could be there, that could trump, not necessarily the projects we've already done, but we have to acknowledge the fact is there's going to be stuff that's going to come along, and I don't want to exclude good projects, good ideas, just because it wasn't here today.
I think if I understand the going forward into the future, that we would be reviewing that on a yearly basis and looking at new things that have come
Yeah, good. And if we have a process for that,
Right.
that's
And-
all we want to be able
And if we've
to do.
accomplished something, then they, naturally, it's done and it's out of there. So I see it as a very fluid process going into the future. It's not
Yeah, we
like
just
these
have- I
are
think-
the only projects we're
Yeah,
ever
and I think we
gonna
have to
do in the
acknowledge that in
federal
our plan.
waters.
That's my point. We just have to acknowledge that in our plan, that step, out of these 10 projects, number 11 is the mystery project
Right.
behind the door.
Well, I think,
Leah?
Well, I also think the extraordinary amount of regional projects that we got were really the big umbrella that we can use to keep the door open for projects that have to fit inside of the regional project, so it reflects all the work that went up to this far. But it's that, oh yeah, what about doing that in my community, or what about taking this and applying it here? So I think before the big suite of regional projects, we weren't thinking along that line, but once we saw them all, we went, here's something that came up from the grassroots and is thinking regionally, and how do we use that also as a way to incorporate other projects and maintain integrity with all the work that everybody already did. And so they're big, they are big in scope, and I just, was throwing that out. I don't have any answers, but it's striking,
Well,
it's
and
unusual.
I think that one of the things that I've heard confusion expressed is, as Uma was saying, we need to wrap up our plan and finalize the grant by June 4th of 2016. But I don't think any of us are spending this amount of time to just then put that plan on the shelf and never live it or use it. I mean, why bother if we're going to do that? So basically, that goes to Russ's comment in that, life is changing on an hourly basis. So certainly a plan we work on and finalize in 2016, some of the things are going to change by 17, 18, going into the future. So I see this as a really dynamic plan that has the ability to change and add projects. And, if somebody gets outside funding for something, I know a lot of times there's grants for sewer projects that aren't part of the IRWM process. Then obviously that would be something that we wouldn't need to have in our plan anymore, but there might be some other bigger thing that's come along in that interim that needs to be in. So I'm not seeing this as ever being written in stone. I mean, I haven't learned anything in 70 years. It's that life changes in a heartbeat. So, we just really need to have this be a flexible plan that we can all live with and hopefully live far into the future.
And I think, I would add to a little bit that came out of the coordinators meeting too, is that recognizing that we do have groups that aren't at the table right now, haven't been able, for whatever reason, to be a large part of them, but we see that this upcoming chapter review as being a way to incorporate, making sure, like, we really, as coordinators on our work group, we all know that we have people that aren't able, for whatever reason, to come to the table. If we can really work with them individually to make sure that their issues get covered in our chapters too, and things like that. So at least it's identified in the plan somewhere, which opens the door then later, even if it's not part of specifically in a regional that we have a means to then say, yes, this was something we identified. But we see that as kind of one of the jobs we might have, like, for this next few months too, is to reach out to some of the groups to make sure that at least they can add some verbiage or something that recognizes that the work they do and that they feel is important in the future in the region does get incorporated somehow. So it was definitely something that we're kind of thinking ahead on too, and making sure we try to capture and really reach out to people, continue to, that ones that didn't put a project in or do things like that. So.
And God knows the state in its infinite wisdom will have things that become high priority over the years that we haven't even thought of yet. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago, nobody would have understood what greenhouse gas was. So I think that flexibility.
We still don't understand that.
And some people don't want to. Yes.
One of the things that Uma was just saying is that the coordinators are going to try to come back through all the submitted projects and see where there's holes, you know, check which RMS strategies somebody chose, and are those the right ones, or did they just check them all, or you know, do some validation steps. But another part of that is the budgets, and I think a fair number, people just kind of put a wild guess in there for a budget because there just wasn't time to really validate that. So I guess I would like some input on how far do we take that. Like, if you're a Sierra Valley Groundwater Management District, should they go out and try to find out, you know, how much is it going to cost to get a consultant to come and put this plan together? You know what I mean? Like, how far should we be pushing it at this point? Because I think when these grant opportunities come around, you don't get huge amounts of time to respond, right? You've got to be fairly nimble, and some of these things are going to require RFPs, and you know what I mean? I'm a little vague on that, on people's time.
I think that's one of the bigger areas that I see as a problem area because what we would estimate today, even if we went and got good estimates on the project, if the project's not implemented for a year or two, we're back at square one and all of that effort is gone. So I think what we've done so far with you know, the rough estimates and the groups kind of have a feel for approximately what something should cost. Is probably about as far as we need to go, unless it's something that, like with Prop 1, where we know of opportunities coming along and we can track what they're going to be looking for. If somebody has projects they're going to think should go under Prop 1 application, they might want to spend a little more time developing that information. If it's still something, well, maybe someday a grant opportunity will come. I don't think that it's worth spending any resources or a lot of time, and I know all our organizations are extremely busy as it is and stressed financially. That'd be my guess. Randy volunteers to do it all for everybody.
One point I think that Chris is trying to make is how far, I mean, I think the projects need that critical look to see how they really fit in with the resource management, how they're described, maybe not a complete review of the financial, but some kind of, you know, another view at it without spending a lot of time to see what that would be.
Well, yeah, in other words, take the deep breath now that the project's in and look at it. But when you start talking about putting out RFPs and talking to consultants, that's a big investment, and that's beyond what I think anybody should be doing, unless they're packaging for a specific.
So one of the things I heard, and I did participate somewhat in the September 9th meeting, is they want to look at them, they want to look at them critically, they want to bring them along and spend some time on it. So I think that's going to happen, as I understand it.
That's good.
The other point I wanted to make is it came up earlier with Trina, with Indian Gym School and the brownfields. And it's about how do we bring something else in that we didn't know about. All of a sudden, there's a potential for that to be potentially financed to address. And Trina's saying, do you know anything else out there? Kind of without making it another project, maybe there's an opportunity to take that one project, kind of sitting here and thinking, well, the Armory here in Quincy. Just expand it without really saying that we brought in a new project. We say, okay, we know we have this Brownfields Opportunity Grant project, the Indian Gym School, and do what Trina's saying is try to find anything else we can tag into it and say it's all part of the sort of the brownfield, you know, the concept that was being proposed with Indian Gym School and that remediation that's there.
That's where I see the coordinators who are already dedicating so much time and effort. But that's the role going forward. I really see them playing more than anything else. Is they're all intimately familiar with the projects within their work group, and they do meet and compare notes. So that if an opportunity comes along like Trina mentioned, my observation would be knowing the players, that they would be saying to each other, there's this opportunity. Do you have something within your work group that could take advantage of it or be rolled together into
So like in the
But
case,
for right now, I'm gonna take a 5-minute break, because all you guys got up, got coffee, walked around.
Got it.
Somewhat
Grounds are
regretfully.
the baby's coughing a little bit, but it's fine, but you're happy.
We need a drink.
Yeah.
There's cookie drink. Okay, we're back. We're back. And we were still finishing up on the project selection process. And so Russ and I gave our 3 cents worth. Anybody else wish to chime in on, rather than trying to rank them within categories, that we spend the time to be sure they're in the right category and have them in the category to look at?
Is there any initial ranking? So like at this point, before any solicitation comes in, is there?
No, what we're suggesting is no, rather than trying to rank them, because each one's kind of discrete, to just class them and classifications. And then depending on what the funding opportunity is,
Feel
yeah.
battle
It
then.
looked like this example that you put in there, it looked like they did do some evaluation to see whether they wanted to include each of the projects in the plan. Is that, am I understanding that right?
Right, so part of this process, I think, is, and this would be gone through with the coordinators, is that we still, the projects do need to meet the, at least address the criteria, the A through L that we had gone through before, that, and had approved before, that matrix that had the criteria that DWR requires, so that each project will need to address that, and we'll have to make sure that they do for inclusion in the plan, and that's kind of the minimum requirements that we had originally talked about. And I think to strengthen this process, and it was good to hear Elizabeth say that the regional projects are going to be looked at more and more favorably by the state, is that we also have some additional lists. We have a list that identifies the disadvantaged community projects, because that is a component of almost every grant solicitation now. And then we also identify the regional projects and have those really pulled out and spend some time describing those in the plan. And then identify the integrated projects too. So we would have a number of lists in the plan that would show that we really went through this process and would, put into the plan and describe to DWR how we went about it and why we decided not to prioritize, but rather come up with these lists instead, and the benefit to the region.
Maybe, what I was referring to, what was in here, is you said, did they meet like a minimum for inclusion in the plan? Was that already done, kind of when you, in the step 1? It's like they wouldn't have even been asked, proponents wouldn't have been asked for a step 2 if they didn't meet the plan.
There were certain minimum requirements that we did review those for, the conceptuals, and they all did move forward, except for the ones that didn't have to MOU. But this will, this second process will be including that climate change step that has the worksheet that we'll have to do. And then just kind of goes into those a little further, each one of those criteria.
So it sounds like every project that was submitted will somehow have a place in the plan.
At this,
point, that's what we're
Yeah,
hoping for.
if you decide to adopt this.
Well, true questions, your ignorance shows, and so I'll make some pretty good questions and see where my ignorance will go from here. It occurs to me that I have to be reminded on a regular basis of it's this. We're doing something, but we really don't know what we're doing it for, because it's a mystery. It's this big, I see this big thing out here saying this, because it's not going to be block grant money. Now, you have to say yes or no, or no, you're wrong, or yes, you're right, because I don't really know. They're not going to say to our particular management group, here is $100 million, do what you think is best based on your plan. Now, that's a different approach than you guys now have a plan. Now you guys can apply for the micromanaged money that some ex-person up here from the government is going to say, we would like to paint trees purple. So we're going to give you all the money you need to get just boatloads of purple paint. And you can do that because that's what we want. We want purple paint on trees. So that's what I don't understand. I have a real hard time grasping making good decisions when I really don't understand where the money's going to come from and how many, these projects we have are all good projects, don't get me wrong, but are we trying to fit this little round little thing in a triangle hole over here because we don't know what they're going to do. And I find that the power base of this editorial of regional water seems to be pretty amazing, because then they, whoever they are, I don't even know who the hell they are, that in some room are going to come up and say, we want purple trees, we think it's a damn good idea, so here's a grant. Who wants to do purple trees? And we're going to say, hey, I have that in my grant, I just have purple trees, that's it, okay, we apply, then we get the money. You know? So straighten me out and get me going in the right direction.
I don't know if I can.
Yeah. Well, my wife has been trying to do that for quite some time, and she has not succeeded.
So I guess this would be a good time to bring up this.
Segue.
Yes. So this is a
That's what I'm
handout.
good for.
I sat in on a webinar that was a public scoping meeting for the Proposition 1 grant program. And this gives them basically a draft of where they're headed with the solicitation for the 13, for what would our funding region of $13 million, how that would play out. And some of the guidelines that they are considering for that solicitation. So I think this is what you're asking. If you go, let me find my page here. So if you go to page 35, slide 35, it talks about eligible projects that would be funded under this, the Irwin program. And again, this is limited to the Irwin grants funds. And it talks about the various projects, types of projects that would be eligible: water reuse and recycling, water use efficiency and water conservation, surface and groundwater storage, water conveyance facilities, watershed protection. So it goes down and lists the types of projects. They're going to come up with their own set of criteria that that they are looking for to meet for projects, for these types of eligible projects, and that's what the management group would use at that time to go through the projects in the plan to rank. But these are the types that they're looking at.
But is the money going to come to this group to manage, or is it they're doing the projects and then it's got to fit that, and then we're saying, hey, your project fix that? That's what doesn't make sense.
So the way the Irwin program is set up is that the money is a competitive process. So the Mountain Counties region has $13 million allocated to that. And when I talked about the collaborative versus competitive process earlier, the collaborative process would be for the management groups of the Irwin regions in the Mountain Counties area to agree to each go for $2 million worth of projects. Submit an application for $2 million. And what's in that application would be projects that were selected by this group. Those projects would come out of the plan that we're developing now. A competitive process would be, okay, there's $13 million amongst all of these IRWIMs in our Mountain Counties region, which includes Cabby, I think there's 5.
Okay.
I think. There's 5, and Cabby, Yuba County, I can't name them all off the top of my head. But would be that we would, you could put forward an application for $13 million worth of projects, but so is every other region, and it becomes competitive at that point. So the money doesn't automatically come to this region, but if the management group were to get together with the other management groups and say, let's all go for $2 million, then you could count on $2 million worth of projects. The application.
And the they, under Prop 1, is Department of Water Resources.
Yes.
Yes.
So they in their windowless room are the deciders, as they would say.
And
It's
this,
becoming a little clearer now. Thank you.
okay. And so this document steps through how they intend to roll out their Proposition 1 funding.
So let me just back up. So who's going to make this decision whether we all want to, have a food fight for the $13 million, or do we all just, settle out of court for $2 million? I mean, how does that happen? When does that process happen?
That would be a discussion that would happen between the regions, so it could be done possibly through the Sierra Water Work Group involvement. It could happen, it's just Sherry calls so-and-so, or you call so-and-so from the other region.
No, I might call him.
So it,
Purple trees are hard to come by.
Yeah, I was looking for it. Okay.
Do you have anything to add in this? I know you've been kind of following Prop 1. Are you still here?
Yep.
You-
Oh, me? Well, then there's this whole other categories of Prop 1s, right? That are not coming through IRWM. But usually they ask, Fish and Wildlife has a whole set of categories. There's just a lot of money coming down right now that came out of that proposition, but it's not running through this. But they usually ask if you're part of an integrated regional water management group and if this project is part of the plan. I don't know how many points you don't get for doing that, but the bigger money's in the other propositions, I have to be honest. The IRWM was pretty slim this time compared to, for example, the one I always keep harping on is the storage bond, 2.7 billion. Okay, now the competition's pretty tough for that storage bond, but so there's a lot of money coming down through, and that's why a lot of groups are already applying for money that's coming down through these programs. So we're stuck between Prop 84 and Proposition 1. That's why our plan's under one set of guidelines and the money's rolling out under another set of guidelines. So that's why it's always going to be confusing, so don't feel bad. And you're never get an answer that makes you happy either, Russell.
Well, and I think one of the things that may help or add to the confusion is that DWR is basically saying that they're going to release for public review and comment the draft IRWM program guidelines, the draft proposal solicitation package. So in December of this year, they're just getting around to releasing this background information for public comment before they ever put out a request for proposals. So, the time, I think the public meetings are, February. So as they're working through Prop 1, they're on a timeline similar to what we are. And so a lot of what you're asking, no one knows, because they haven't finished it yet to put it out there for comment. I think Department of Water Resources, is trying to kind of figure out what they're doing and how they're going to do it also. And I notice in here, it's like, what do we learn from Prop 84? So they're looking at lessons learned in the process we're in right now to integrate into this process too.
Our Prop 50 grant was for $7 million. And now they're talking about $13 million for that whole
Yeah, it
region.
gives you an idea.
Yeah. Gives
We
you
did
an
great
idea.
the first time.
Yeah.
And I would,
get it.
my estimate of how we would coordinate with, do we agree to have a bloodbath and all fight for the same pot, or do we agree to work together, is that the chair of the various IRWMs, somebody would say, could we have a meeting and pull all those people together and sit down and say, okay, how do you feel about this? And it wouldn't have to be everybody in that region. You could have probably 2 or 3 of the entities in the region that did agree to work together. And that would probably make some of what they're doing on a big regional basis even more attractive. But I think that you'd have to have that sit-down meeting at some point to say, is it going to be every man for himself? And I've been to a lot of those kind of meetings in my career. And honestly can say that there's always going to be people at the table that feel they have the stronger position, density per capita, blah, blah, blah. And they're not going to want to play.
Yeah, they don't want to play.
Right.
Because we're going to win.
Exactly. So it's a real difficult process.
Forgive me, I'm still kind of came to this meeting because my boss kid, I'm still learning everything. But so you guys, basically the people who have passed the second stage is 81 projects. And how many do you guys think that you could award if you go with the option to combine regions and get $2 million? That's the thing. That's one of the, probably a lot of concern is that if you guys were to integrate, which would be a good idea, but now you're going from possibly getting a huge chunk change to getting less chunk of change, but yet you have 81 projects that have been submitted.
However, no one's made the decision to even go there yet.
No, I'm just saying,
I mean,
like,
that
if you
would be a
guys were,
future,
it's
a
something to
future
think about.
discussion. Yeah, that would be a
That was
future
one.
discussion for the steering group to decide what do we want to do.
And
Right.
I think DW, it'd be interesting if it's part of their strategy, or their flow, is by letting some of these other entities roll out stuff. There's projects that are gonna get funded to these other entities, and they're gonna roll off the IRWM plates. And that could, maybe that'll be to our advantage, who knows, but, so, some of the projects that, even of those 81 right now, I know of groups who are ready to roll and are applying to these other already money. So they will then no longer be
Part of
a
that-
part of,
part of that.
yeah, part of the project. So there's that to consider too, that it's like, not all, and not all of them are ready to go right now, so even if you could, I mean, I can, at least in my group, could tell you that, you know, if the solicitation was to come out tomorrow, they wouldn't be ready, you know, in a month to roll out a full proposal probably. So there's lots of factors. It's not that the 81 are not ready to go like today, and they might not be 81 last composition rolls out.
Forgive me, I've learned.
But for right now,
That's good.
but for right now, other than a general discussion, we're not making the decision whether we want to fight it out for the whole pot or cooperate with other regions or anything else that's in the future. Leah, did you have something you wanted to
I
add?
just wanted to wrap and say that the IRWM history has been a lot of emphasis on municipal projects and increasing emphasis on disadvantaged communities and tribal. And so maybe that's gonna change, but usually their criterion is so strict for the IRWM that it's really hard to do a landscape project and have the same rigor and the certainty that you do for a pipe and plumbing project. And so it's always been, now unless they change things drastically, you can expect that bias to stay in the IRWM pot. But there's pots coming down specifically for ag and specifically for watershed, you know, that are much more geared to the kind of analysis that you do for those kinds of projects. So they
Like you
kind of
said,
parted
you're not
it
coming
out.
through fish and wildlife. There's-
Way different, yeah, and so there's lots of ways to cut this, but that's what the excitement over the regional projects is about. We go in a lot of different directions.
Okay, so our question now, to get back on track, is, if I understand the direction you're wanting, is do we want to try to go with ranking the projects within their categories, or do we want to just form grouping of projects that are similar, like municipal services? You're the easy one because it's so cut and dry. But, you know, is that the question basically?
Right, do you
So,
want, yeah.
steering group, we need to have opinions on how you think would be best to do that. Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we direct staff to proceed with the categorization of the projects, further developing the projects. I think ranking would be, in some instances, kind of wheel spinning at this point, because we haven't seen the solicitations from DWR until we do. I think it would be, I'm not sure how productive it would be. I like the idea of further developing the project, putting them in categories and waiting for the solicitations, and then putting together an application based on the projects that we have. And that was basically his recommendation, as I understand it, and I make a motion that we give that direction.
Okay. Was that a second?
Second.
I thought it was.
I agree with that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. There's some direction. Okay, project monitoring. Now this ought to be an
What about the
interesting.
future project activity
Oh.
considerations? It's not, that's a topic.
So actually, just two more things under this item. I wanted to point out in this scoping meeting, there was a nugget of information in there I think that would be in good standing for is that the new Prop 1 guidelines are going to be very much the same as the Prop 84, but they are going to require that stormwater management plans be included in the urban plans. I don't know that we have any here, but that was one. And the other one is it has to be a discussion of the pollutants, like arsenic and various other pollutants, that a lot of plans are going to have to go back and update during this next process before they're eligible for submitting for the grant funding. And I think we have quite a bit of that information in the 2005 plan, but we'll be able to incorporate it into this one and be a step ahead. Just wanted to point that out. And then I had some questions at the end of this item for us folks to think about. These are basically what Russell had talked about. You know, how will this project list be updated?
Page 77.
Who will be responsible for the periodic review and call for projects? Will updating of the list require readoption of the memorandum of understanding or the plan itself? And then what is the process for responding to grant solicitation? And these are questions that we're going to have to answer in the plan, in the document itself. I don't know if it's best to have a discussion in a meeting in this forum, or if it's best to put suggestions forward through email, and then I can pull them all together and we can discuss them. I'm open to how you'd like to work through them.
Well, that's a big subject.
I think that's too much to grab today.
Yeah, I do too.
And so I would recommend that you bring forth some recommendations on that. The one comment I would have, and it kind of goes along with what the chair was saying a while ago, is that I definitely think there should be a way for projects that come up from this day forward to be able to join the list if they're worthy projects. I don't think we have necessarily everything here that we may need or want. And so I would just like to see a process. I don't know who is going to call for projects or how the list would be updated. I think you would probably have some ideas about the best way to do that, or how other groups have done it. My only concern is that there be a way for projects to join the group, join the list, get added on, whether they're proposed and approved by the work group and they send them forward as an addition at some point. And then I guess they could be added on, but I wouldn't want to see it just a closed thing and say this is all we got.
I don't think so.
So
I guess-
I would like to see a process to let people add on.
And I think part of why I might be looking a little mystified with these questions is because the concept that I've always had, which very likely might have only been in my mind and no one else's, is that the management group, not necessarily us, but a management group would stay in place beyond the end of the grant. And so with that in mind, it would seem to me that that group would be looking at updating the project list, working with the work group coordinators, who I hope we still would have some of those if we haven't totally burned them out. And that it would be that same group that would, when a grant opportunity comes along, or when the list is, we've got so many things done, the list is exhausted, that would put out a call for projects like we did before. And as far as updating the list, the same thing. Now, readopting the MOU, it would kind of depend on what the MOU says, because if there's no termination date, then I would assume an entity that signed the MOU would still be part of the MOU and wouldn't have to sign another one. So it would only be a new entity that maybe, like Terry was saying, there's a lot of groups we know that we haven't engaged with yet that hopefully will engage. And yes, they would be required to sign it like everybody else was. But I don't think that for readoption of the plan, unless we have something in the MOUs that say it terminates at a given time, and I don't think so. I can't see what would be the point of, I mean, a person can always withdraw from an MOU if they wish. So there you be. And responding to grant solicitations, again, I would think it would be the steering group that would say, you know, like we are right now, there's an opportunity coming along next year, and we need to gear up to start looking at responding. But I guess that's why I was looking so mystified, because it's kind of like, I never envisioned that this process would end at the end of the current grant, or I wouldn't be sitting here. I mean, it's too much work just to get something and put it on the shelf and forget about it.
Kind of like checking a box.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
in some regions,
don't believe in doing that.
in some regions, the management group will assign a smaller group that does, that deals with the projects after the plan is adopted.
And we may decide to do that, but I think as Bill just said, that's beyond our capacity to decide today.
Okay, I just wanted to put these questions forward for thought.
I think, yeah, we need to think about it.
I guess my question to you, is it possible for staff to come back with a proposal for how the project list would be updated? Is that something you can do?
I can certainly draft something for discussion.
That would be good.
Well, yeah, and I would like the chair to say something silly so I can disagree and go crazy, but I agree.
Hey.
I hate to be so.
Wish you didn't have a cold.
Yeah, so I can really speak up. So, no, I sure you're right on, as far as I'm concerned. And then we could put in there maybe some, ad hoc project management committee or whatever people are doing that makes total sense. Just as long as you follow that process that Sherry laid out, I think it's
One of
the
things-
Sherry plan. Not to be confused with the Marshall Plan or any of those really infamous plans.
One of the
All
things
my plans are in it.
that Elizabeth brought up today is the potential for some ongoing annual funding to come out of the legislature. I think that would help us do a lot more and get crystallize some thinking here, because we're looking at when the grant's done, for one, the flood district doesn't have any more money to throw at, at this or the county at this point. That could change, but that happens, then I think a lot of things get triggered with that as we move forward into the future. And that's almost a critical component of an ongoing process.
And in that instance, I agree with what she said, that we really do need to engage to lobby for that. Because I think most all of the higher WMs will ultimately die out.
A lot of them have already.
Because it's the same thing we're hearing from our organizations,
Yeah, every
capacity.
single one of them.
If we don't have some kind of funding for capacity, it ends up dying. So we need to lobby for that. Okay? Everybody happy to move on? Oh boy. Project monitor. Let us discuss how we are going to monitor.
So this is a continuation from our June 15th discussion of project monitoring. At that time, the management group developed a policy. And so our next steps are to discuss plan performance and also project monitoring and how those will be spelled out in the plan. And the questions that we just went through and this item, a lot of this are questions that we have to answer in the development of the chapters. And so it's helping me set the groundwork for that. So for plan performance and monitoring, the purpose is to ensure that an Irwin plan is being effectively implemented and identifies the process that the management group is efficiently making progress towards the objectives of the Irwin plan, that the management group is implementing projects listed in the Irwin plan, and that each project in the plan is monitored to comply with all of the rules and requirements. Monitoring performance is closely related to the implementation of projects, and we'll have to identify the criteria to evaluate the process to meet the plan objectives and the process that will link the project completion to the plan implementation. So it's making that connection about how we're going to make sure the plan goes forward and who's going to keep track of that. The other component to this chapter, this part of the plan, is the project-specific performance measures and monitoring plan, and that's what we got into a little bit with the last the policy. So we need to identify what's being monitored, the adaptation measures for issues should they occur or pop up during the project, location of the project, the frequency of the monitoring, the protocols and methodology for monitoring, the tracking method, and the procedures to ensure schedule and adequate resources are in place throughout the time frame. And this is the policy that was approved at our last meeting, which identifies that a third party will be responsible for the monitoring, and that it be transparent, the results available to the public, and it be a science-based process. So again, I have staged this with the questions format, which I'm not sure is going to help us out too much. After our last discussion.
Based on your previous.
Yeah. So things we need to answer in the plan are what group's going to be responsible for the urban implementation evaluation? How often will the management group's performance and implementing projects in the plan must be evaluated? How will plan implementation be tracked? How or should individual projects that receive other grant funding be tracked and monitored? And this gets to what we spoke about with projects that receive other grant funding and kind of are crossed off the plan list. Should those still be monitored, and should that be tracked and fit into the monitoring process here? How will lessons learned from project-specific monitoring efforts be used to improve implementation of other projects in the future? Who's responsible for development of project-specific monitoring plans and the activities? We had talked about a third party. And then at what stage of project development should that monitoring plan be prepared? And again, the contents of the monitoring plan, which we had gone through a little bit a couple of slides ago. So these are the questions that we have to go through and we have to answer for the plan itself. And then I'm hoping today that we can just enter some discussion about how the project monitoring will look. And we can kind of maybe set aside the plan monitoring aspect for a future discussion. I think it kind of ties into the item that we had before. And maybe I can pull some stuff in for consideration into drafting something.
Okay, Sherry, shoot.
Okay,
You got a plan, don't you?
sure. I always have.
See? Yeah, I think this is best management practices. I mean, this is reinventing the wheel, if you ask me. There's somebody out there that knows how to do this, not me. That, I mean, if there is somewhere out there a plan that somebody has, like Homeless says, I got it, that monitors projects. I mean, we're not the first person in the world to ever do a project.
No.
There's some good ones out there. Let's go steal it. Let's boost it.
So generally what most plans do is they just identify the components of a monitoring plan instead of, really
He knows how
specifying.
I segue into this. I just, we're
I
working.
like
I'm on the payroll. You don't know that.
I like
She gives
it.
me about $10 right here and lunch.
We're synced.
Yeah, we're right there. All right, Uma, go.
So these are really the components that have been identified in most other plans, and it's not going into too much detail because again, that will be likely be a part of future solicitations. But it's just, we want to generalize in the plan that it's important to the management group that these monitoring items be incorporated into any monitoring plan. So I think as far as contents, we could start here and if in the process of developing a chapter we come up with some others that are important to the management group and to the region, then we can look at those.
I think this is a really good start because it so depends on, every project is so, as we said, different and would require a different method of monitoring or a different level of monitoring. That you can't really get real specific in the overall. So I think just, requiring that those aspects be identified and addressed would probably cover just about anything. The only other thing would be who's doing the monitoring. Because it was pretty clear that everybody wanted a uninterested third party to do it. Karen?
Can I ask just for some clarification on Uma on this? So this is really about monitoring the plan, specific projects in it, but not the actual, is it also the scientific monitoring of it, the real nitty-gritty detail, or are those two separate monitorings? I can see monitoring the plan and the progress that it's making, i.e. put these projects out in this many years, you've done this many, and they've fulfilled, and they're
And the
doing-
effectiveness of
and the
the
effectiveness of
management.
them, and then that's how you're kind of seeing how you've progressed through the plan. But then is included in that this project specific mean the nitty-gritty scientific, like, I don't know, flow rates or, I don't know, whatever. I'm wondering if they're two different things, or are we talking?
I think, well, as you mentioned, each type of project has its own monitoring requirements.
Right.
For example, an engineering project through municipal has its own set of
Right.
monitoring requirements that are going to be different than a restoration project or something. So I think that these are more, monitoring, right, more general.
So
Like how well is that project, to monitor that project for implementation of the plan.
Okay, that makes sense to me. That's
And
how I was
I
reading
think
it,
that
but I
was-
wanted to make sure that.
And that's kind of what was confusing on the agenda because the title is project monitoring, and to me that means specific on-the-ground project being monitored, which is what we said we wanted outside third party to do.
That's
And
what I
then
was
as-
thinking.
Yeah, and as you said, then the general, how are we doing and how is the plan itself working? That type of monitoring and reporting, which I'm sure DWR will want to know along the way. That's the one that I agree with. I agree with you, Russell, that,
Girl.
that you need to figure out how are other people going to do that monitoring. Because I'm hesitant to say how we want to monitor ourselves. I don't think that that's a very good plan, because I just think we're going to do great. And everything's going to work. So
Sheriff,
I'd appreciate it if you guys would bring back a proposal on how we would monitor the performance of the plan, rather than calling it project monitoring.
Because one of, and I'm not going to hide from the issue, one of the concerns is some of the stream restoration techniques of the past that were done here. There was some concern that the monitoring is perhaps not objective. I guess that's what I'm going to say. And I think that's why some of this issue came up and bubbled up to discuss the third party and everything. That's really not a model that fits every kind of project. I'm thinking of Indian Gym School again. What's the monitoring there? Well, if they got a grant, they would probably have to ensure that the asbestos and the lead paint goes to Kettleman Hills as a part of the, the remediation of the building. Well, I don't know if you need a third party to do that, or that's a certification.
Well, but see, Randy, that's where it comes in. We would be needing to look at specifically what is it they're saying they're doing.
Right.
Because if the only thing they're doing is remodeling the school, or preserving it, or something like that, you're right. All they'd have, as part of whatever grant they got to do that, they're going to have to certify the hazardous waste went to the right place and so on. But that's kind of not what we're talking about right now. And I think that as each project comes forward and is submitted for a grant is when, at that point in time, with this criteria as a basic criteria, as part of the grant package, we would say this is who we plan to have do the monitoring. This is what's being monitored. This is where it's going to be. This is how often they're going to do it. But it would be specific to that project. But what I'm requesting separate from that is that you guys figure out how to monitor us and the performance of the IRWM plan. Because that was part, see, it's kind of like apples and oranges are being mixed here. And that's what Terry was confused about.
Right.
Because one is the monitoring of specific projects when they're on the ground and being submitted for a grant. That monitoring plan. The other one is, and I certainly agree, the performance of our whole IRWM plan went in place, and of the steering group, and every other aspect of it. I don't exactly know how that would be monitored. I mean, as an elected official, my performance will be monitored because I won't get reelected. But I don't know about the rest of you, because I don't think you'll ever get off of here. But if you see what I mean, it'd be like us. It would be like us doing just what we criticize other people for doing. Coming up with monitoring our own stuff, and that's not good. So what we're wanting is some plan to be monitored by other groups.
Yeah, whip some up.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the point of being audited, that's what, the audit process for a public agency does just that. It's all focused on money, but it's the procedures and policies, are they followed? Do you do what you say you're going to do? And so we rely on audits really to a public agency to be the efficient, that's what we always say. How'd you do with your audit? Well, we had 4 pages of audit.
And we don't audit ourselves.
We don't audit ourselves.
So does that answer your question?
Sort of.
No, there's some clarity there, thank you, because this has been something we needed clarity on.
Yeah, and I think, like I say, a lot of the confusion is the apples and oranges of 2 different types of monitoring. Okay? Frank, you have been so patient.
Yes,
And I just want you to understand that this is because she's the one that made me move you to the end. So, we would like to now take up item 5 on the agenda and hear from the municipal services.
No, you go ahead.
So municipals are our leaders, the West Hill Work Group, so we're glad you're going first.
I'll introduce it real quick if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, yeah, as Leah said, the Municipal Services Work Group is the first work group to work through their resource management strategy recommendations. They did need an extra time. Had a 5th meeting in July and worked through these. So the recommendation, the resource management strategies that were assigned to them were these ones here, and I won't talk through them because we're going to go into detail in each one. And then Frank's going to do our presentation.
Yeah, like Uma said, we met one additional time. Is kind of confusing for some of us, and some people who have never worked in this type of atmosphere. And so I came to the first meeting and had some suggestions for them. I noticed that Uma does not have different colors. On my final list, I have different colors, so I know which ones we added to it. But a lot of what we specified as a recommendation came from existing ERMs. We didn't recreate the wheel, but we added some stuff to it. And we have 11 different ones, and we'll start with the urban water use efficiency. Implementing programs such as best management practices, that's kind of the standard one for most people. Provide information to homeowners regarding water efficient landscapes, i.e. encourage leak reporting, rain technology, and also irrigation management. Again, something that we kind of added in there. Increasing public outreach and encouraging community involvement. Funding incentive programs for small districts and economically taxed. Large land-scale surveys and development of water efficient landscape guidelines. And internal water distribution system audits, which I think is very important. A lot of people have water being lost. They don't even know where it's going. They don't have any way of knowing it. Identify excessive water users and offer water audits. Again, we see an area that all of a sudden using about 2 or 3 times as much water as they should be. Why? And offer to help them rather than telling them, you guys go hire somebody to figure it out. We've got enough smart people in this county that can help them out. And we should do that. And then the last one for water use efficiency is promote the use of gray water disposal systems. Something that the state of California I know has kind of in the back of their mind of a re-promotion program of that. So if and when they come out and say that they will look at them for new developments, or if it's possible in existing areas, they would be more willing to grasp that idea and run with it. So we put that strategy into RMS 2. RMS 6, which is system reoperations, collaborating between federal, state, and local agencies on system reoperation studies. Some agencies will say, we have this broken down equipment or equipment that's been mothballed, we need to replace it. Well, no, can you go back in and look at it, see if you can rebuild it instead of replacing it? That kind of reoperations. What isn't being used that could be used when a situation arises? Perform system audits to identify operational improvements that can be made. Kind of the same thing as reoperation. Conjunctive management. Is there a possibility of using water, surface water and groundwater in conjunction with each other to supplement supplies? And that was it for RMS number 6. RMS number 7, water transfers, developing and implementing groundwater management plans and monitoring programs. Assemble data from existing monitoring programs and analyze in an effort to identify additional areas to monitor. That is one that we added in. I know of at least 7 or 8 different studies that have been done since I've been in Plumas County that don't cover exactly the same thing, but they cover different areas of Plumas County. And it would be interesting to see that put together in a database to find out where our trouble spots are. And then also consider intra, and interstate basin transfers to maximize water use. Not 100% sure exactly what that is, but Robert Beecher was saying that it's important because you might have the ability to transfer water between agencies but it might not be just inter, it might be interstate. It could go across the border, you know, things like that. So he asked us to put that in there. RMS 11, municipal recycled water. Increased funding availability for water reuse, recycling facilities and infrastructure. Creating education curriculum for public schools and institutions of higher learning to educate the public about recycled water. Engaging the public in an active dialogue and engaging participation in the planning process of water recycling projects, including non-potable and potable applications. Again, water recycling, specifically from wastewater, can be treated to different degrees and used for different things. Providing resources, for example, funding, to agencies that will perform comprehensive analysis of existing water recycling projects to estimate cost benefits and water deliveries. Again, that's something that I just recently went through, and it was a pretty good chunk of change to do it, but at least I have a plan for the future in my area. Assessing water recycling technology to determine least costly and environmentally appropriate technology based on location and need. Again, that's the degree to which you treat that reclaimed water. You can have it just treated enough so it doesn't cause an environmental or a health problem, but you can only use it on non-root crops. Or you could go all the way up to the top and put it through an RO unit and have it cleaner than your drinking water. So there's all those stages that, and depending on how you're going to use that water, is how far you have to go to treat it. So that's it for municipal recycled water. RMS 14, which is drinking water treatment and distribution. Developing incentives to allow water systems to reduce waste of limited water resources. And providing additional funding for water supply, water treatment, and infrastructure projects to ensure safe and reliable supply of drinking water for individuals and communities. That one kind of wraps around, some people still have steel pipe in the ground and they're serving the water. They need to get that pipe out of the ground and put it in some sort of a plastic. Some of the ones that we added from our group: improving treatment facilities to include more sophisticated methods of treatment, such as membrane filtration, ultraviolet light disinfection, and ozonization disinfection. Again, using liquid chlorine, for instance, sodium hypochlorite adds salts to the water. So how do we take that out? Well, we look at ultraviolet light, for instance, as an alternative. Upgrading aging water storage and distribution systems, which may have an impact on water quality that pose public health risks. Again, old pipes, bad pipes, old tanks, that kind of thing. Improving water systems to prevent cross-contaminations and backflow in distribution systems. You'd be surprised how many people have large irrigated areas hooked directly to their drinking water distribution system with no backflow. It's incredible. It's really scary. And then finally, perform system audits to identify operational improvements that can be made. Again, you know, we have enough educated folk around here. If the agency needs help, we could go and help them, versus having them hire some expensive engineer to do what we could do here locally. Just from cooperation between the agencies. So the RMS 15, groundwater/aquifer remediation. Implementing source water protection measures. Establishing and supporting funding for detecting emerging contaminants by commercial laboratories and installation of wellhead treatment systems. We added treating contaminated groundwater while it's still in the aquifer, which is fairly new technology. They're starting to show that if they, for instance, for arsenic remediation, if they can control the area of the aquifer, they can treat it in the ground before they use it.
Probably better.
Extracting contaminated groundwater from the aquifer and treating it outside of the aquifer. Again, it's ex situ. It's basically taking it out, putting it through a removal system, and doing something with it. And typically, they put it back in the ground so that it cleans everything up. And then finally, implement groundwater management plans for all users of shared groundwater aquifers. Again, part of the areas that I'm from over there in Plumas, Eureka, we have a groundwater management plan. People over in Delacour, do they have one? They use groundwater wells. Do the people over in Gold Mountain have one? Do we do it on a regional basis? Again, all the information that Burkhardt is working on can be combined into one groundwater management plan for that area, for the Mohawk Valley area. It would help a lot. RMS 18, salinity management, treatment, membrane or distillation technologies to remove salts from treated wastewater and recycled water. Again, wastewater typically is higher in salts due to the concentration, and so we would need to be cognizant of the fact that if we're going to put in or reuse the wastewater, the treated wastewater, what's that going to do to our salt value of where we're replacing it? Real-time salinity management, improving coordination of salt loading from upstream point and non-point sources to manage a maximum load of salts that does not exceed water quality objectives. Again, there's people that discharge into the Middle Fork during the wintertime. What kind of impact is that wastewater discharge having on the river, and what do we need to look at in the future for them to either manage it or take care of it, take it out. RMS 19, urban stormwater runoff management, coordinated efforts with the agency, stakeholders, and the public to decide how urban runoff management should be integrated into work plans. Again, best management practices is always probably the best thing. Working with community to identify opportunities to address urban runoff management. Providing incentives for the installation of low-impact development features on new and existing developments. Emphasizing source control measures and strong public education / outreach efforts as being the most effective way to manage urban runoff. And increased community education efforts in coordination with organizations currently doing this work to include drains to river notification, and on storm drains and awareness programs for proper chemical disposal. In other words, you don't want people going around putting their used motor oil down inside of a ditch somewhere or in one of the stormwater collection systems. RMS 23, land use planning and management. Planning for more compact and sustainable communities, which will assist in reducing the reliance on the state's water supply. Recycle uses have a lot to do with that. You know, how much impact is it going to have if it can be developed and shown that they're going to reuse their wastewater, they're going to use their gray water, items such as that. Planning for growth in a way that considers availability of water supply, water resource features, wetlands, groundwater recharge areas, and policies and regulations about water quality, drainage, flooding, and storage. That's one thing that my group added in there, was they kind of hit everything except storage. Increased and enhanced communication between land use and planners and water managers. That's the last one that we have for the land use planning and management. Getting there. RMS 27, the economic incentives. Encourage regular examination and adjustment where necessary of water rates. Most of us that charge for water do that, but some people have not done it in a long time and they need some help. And some of us who do it all the time, we can sure extend our hands and help them out. Encourage use of tiered rate structures and adopting policies and programs that promote long-term water use efficiency. Let's see, and the last one, which is wastewater / NPDES. Our group asked to put this in there because it's a huge issue for us. For some of you who don't know, NPDES it's the National Discharge Pollutant Elimination System, and it's a permitting system that the state uses to regulate our wastewater discharge flows. The unfortunate part is if you have one of these permits, you accidentally do not meet your discharge requirements, it's an automatic fine. There is no way around it. So, real important that this got in there because there's elements to this that can help these people meet their discharge requirements 100% of the time. The first one is water / wastewater treatment. Water and wastewater treatment as a resource management strategy potentially includes integration of agricultural and domestic wastewater into the water supply equation. Water wastewater treatment has been a significant issue for several decades. Looking at regional facilities, 2 areas that have a wastewater treatment or collection and treatment now, could they integrate into a regional facility? Water wastewater treatment as a supply option through groundwater recharge and or other means. Again, we can treat our treated wastewater to a higher degree than our drinking water comes out of the ground. So why don't we beneficially reuse it and put it back into the groundwater basins? The second one is aging wastewater infrastructure and the need for upgrades to meet new and revised state standards. The strategy will also be important when considering water recycling opportunities, and the actions might include some facility upgrades, assessment of private sewage treatment for safety next to wells in areas of semi-dense development, basically 1 acre plots. Take a look at that, make sure that this acre isn't going to affect that acre, that's not going to affect that acre, that type of thing. And the third one, infrastructure reliability. Recognize the importance of maintaining and upgrading infrastructure for water supply, treatment, distribution, wastewater collection, treatment, and disposal, recycled water treatment and distribution. Infrastructure improvements are continually needed as facilities age. Demands on their use increase due to population growth, degraded water quality, or increased water quality standards, and new technologies are introduced. The fourth one and the fifth one are ones that we added. Provide regional operator training to enhance knowledge of wastewater collection, treatment, and disposal, which will increase the certified operational pool in the area, basically succession planning. And I dug up some information from that from the state board sites, and seeing how big Plumas County is, we have 36 water treatment operators, we have 51 distribution operators, and 23 wastewater operators in the whole county. And most of us are probably getting to the place in about the next 5 or 10 years where we're all going to retire.
Can you repeat?
Sure, but it's 36 water treatment operators, 51 distribution operators, and 23 wastewater. And the breakdown for wastewater was interesting because they have 6 levels of certification, from an operator in training all the way up to a grade 5. We have 2 OITs, 5 grade 1s, 10 grade 2s, 4 grade 3s, no grade 4s, and only 2 grade 5s. We're losing all of our upper...
And the grade 4s would normally be the ones that would advance to grade 5.
Right,
with
right.
testing and education.
Yeah, most of our plants in this county, I don't think require anything over a grade 3 yet. But at this point, we only have 4 in the whole county, and I think they all work for the same agency. So we have to be really careful about that. We're talking regional facilities and where are we going to get this pool of people that are going to replace us. And the last one is increase public outreach activities to promote the water and wastewater field as career paths. Again, hitting up the high schools, maybe having something at Feather River, going to job fairs, something in that nature to get the word out that these career fields are here. I mean, to get your water treatment license grade 1 and your distribution license grade 1, it just takes a high school diploma and some information that you can learn online. But anything higher than that, it's all hands-on after that. So the wastewater field has an operator and training program because their requirements are you sign up and then you have to put a minimum of 1 year of hands-on experience to be eligible to take the state test. And so that's a little tougher to get into, but once you're there, it's a really good career. I got into it by accident and I haven't done it all.
Well, I have to, number one, thank you. This is really well done.
Thank you.
You and the group. And I'm really glad you added those last two because I know in the Lake Elman area we've had a situation where we lost one of the operators and they were begging to borrow part-time from the other districts and had a really hard time recruiting. So I think it is something that, as you said, the more of us that are at the table with gray hair and nobody coming along beneath, it becomes very concerning.
Yeah. Well, and the other problem is also pay scales. You know, you go through all the effort of being trained and you do all the schooling, you come up here and make a quarter of what you can make in the Bay Area. I mean, you know, jobs such as mine are going for 200 plus.
Yeah. Of course, then you got traffic and smog.
Well, yeah, you've got all those other things, but that's why I don't go back in there. I came up here to get away from that stuff. But we have to be cognizant of it because it's going to bite us in the rear end one of these days. There's just not going to be enough of us around. I'm not going to work forever.
I think so. Any questions for Frank? Boy, he set a high bar for the rest of us.
I know, that's what we always look at.
Boy.
You're up.
Again, thank you so much. Okay, that brings us to the next meeting schedule unless you have other questions.
I just wanted to say that our next steps would be to share these with the other work groups so they have an opportunity to add anything that they feel might be necessary or to make some comments. And then the next work group presentations, the floodplains, meadows, and water bodies work group will present in October. And the Uplands and Forest and the Tribal Advisory Committee are going to be working on recommendations together, and they will be presenting in November along with the agricultural land stewardship. Now we can go to so with the so we skipped a meeting because we didn't have a quorum. So to make up for that, I'm recommending that we do meet again in October and in November also. I'd like to suggest the October 23rd date. If that works for folks, it's the Friday at 1 o'clock. That works well for the climate change consultants who will be presenting at our next work group. They said they could make the Wednesday or Friday of the following week work as well, but that one would work the best.
Okay. Does the 23rd at 1 o'clock work for everybody? Yes? Yes, okay. October 23rd, 1 o'clock, same time.
Yes. So we'll hear some work group updates, an update from Tina or Sherry and tribal outreach efforts. And then the focus will be the climate change technical study presentation. We'll look at the draft implementation project lists, hopefully, and then the presentation from the floodplains, meadows, or water.
Super. Anybody have anything else? If not, we're adjourned.
I have a question.
Right, so we're together.
At this point in time, not prior to full vaccine. So the same.
Oh, it's
Going all these meetings or something. I get my stuff taken care of.